Hey everyone, so vlog number 3, sticking to the promise I made myself in terms of just keeping on doing this. I was away for the weekend, so had a couple of days where I couldn't film anything, but today's video for me is all about talking about my interest in the comedy side of things. So talked a lot about my art last time, and I think the thing for me is that I'm on a real journey right now with the comedy stuff, and all at an amateur level, but I feel like I'm starting to understand better the mechanics of how I might get from where I am right now to sort of pursuing comedy as an active and regular activity. And so I'll talk about what my journey's been with that so far and what I'm hoping to achieve. And also I've got a few complaints and I need to just get off my chest about things that are winding me up. And so I thought I might as well bring them into this video. But comedy for me, I've been a massive fan of comedy my whole life. Like from seeing cartoons to those first movies you get exposed to. My mom was a big fan of Steve Martin and Martin Short and really funny guys. Like sense of humor was really important to my mom, particularly in the things that she consumed in terms of movies and TV and what she'd let us watch. And so I've always found it fascinating the impact that making people laugh can have. We had a household where our dad was pretty grumpy, and so anytime there was laughter, it really sort of opened up the mood and relieved the tension. And so I think I sort of learned that at a young age of using comedy as a way of trying to sort of break through what could be a sort of dark or sad atmosphere in life. And so I just loved consuming it as a fan. And so grew up in the 90s, so you got your Cartoon Network cartoons, the Nickelodeon side of things. You could get access to a friend's house or family's houses, and it was just anything that sort of became like imagination fuel, like crazy animation or slapstick in movies. Like Monty Python was a thing that I really just found. Doesn't matter how many times you watch it, like they are always going to catch you out with the absurdity of the stuff they come out with. And then as I got older, you got things like South Park and things really pushing, and stand-up comedy really pushing the boundaries of whoa, I cannot believe they've just said that. How have they got away with it? Why is that so funny? And I sort of lived through this period where things like the South Park movie and then all this sort of parental advisory on cartoons and content that kids can consume. And you marry that up with a real sort of boom of stand-up comedy TV shows being put out in the UK. So things like Mock the Week, Shooting Stars, these were all on when I was in high school. And it was just basically spotlighting stand-up comedy and these comedians, and they felt like rock stars to me. I couldn't imagine anything more fun than getting to tell jokes on stage, and then when you're not doing that, you're on TV shows taking the piss out of each other. It just seems like this the absolute dream professional existence for me. And so went all through high school and I went through uni as well in Glasgow. Still being a massive fan of comedy, but never sort of taking that leap myself of getting on stage. And it didn't even feel like it was in my repertoire or in my capability to get on stage and make people laugh. Because I was a very quiet kid, managed to translate some of that shyness into a dry sense of humor that I was developing through high school. But by no extent was I ever the class clown or the funny one in the group. I grew up with guys that I thought were all really funny and felt much funnier than I was. I don't drink, so there was a big sort of portion of my late adolescence where that whole sort of drink culture and who the crazy ones are, the funny ones are on a night. I was never in that category. And so the humor side of things for me has been a long, slow burn to even like attempt it publicly. Always try and make people laugh in a social situation, but I don't think I'm necessarily people's default choice for like, oh, I can imagine this guy on stage. And then it wasn't until sort of my late 20s, I think I was 28 or 29. It was the 2019 was the first time I got on stage at a stand-up open mic. It was a place called The Stand in Glasgow, and it's somewhere I went to see a show called Red Raw, which is their newcomers night. I went to see that on a really regular basis while I was at uni, and you couldn't believe the sort of guts of these people getting up on stage and trying it. And I thought, I've got to do it. I can't just be a spectator of comedy my whole life. I need to see if I've got this as a skill set. And got the date, prepared some jokes, or practiced it with my wife loads, but we were both laughing at the stuff that I had written, but you never know, right? You never know if you're just living in a vacuum or if there's any hope of these jokes or any of it landing on stage. And I was really happy with the response I got. Like, there were people laughing. There's a 5-minute slot. They were laughing throughout the 5 minutes. It's not like by any means that I brought the house down or anything, but there wasn't silence. And ideas that I had to be funny, like, landed in a room as funny things. And so I came away from that pretty happy, to be honest. And the way it works with that comedy club is that if you don't do anything devastatingly wrong, they'll let you get another slot at another one of their open mics. And so I did another slot in their Edinburgh venue, and I went and did a Dundee open mic, 2 different Edinburgh open mics for different clubs, and an open mic in Glasgow at a different venue. And then the pandemic kicked in, and that all drew the stand-up open mic into a close at that point. At one of the mics I went to, it was only comics in the room, and I got heckled during my set by another comic, and it really threw me off my rhythm, because I had this sort of prepared set that I was going to do, and because someone interrupted it, I was totally thrown. And I thought to myself, right, I need to get better at thinking on my feet. I found an improv class that was running in Glasgow, and I took that class that weekend. So the open mic happened on the Monday. That following Saturday, I was in my first improv class, and I really quickly became a big fan of improv comedy, because it was an opportunity to try and be funny at a much faster pace than it happens in stand-up. And all the pressure of like having to write a thing that's funny and deliver it well was completely removed. And so I was like, well, this is way more fun and less stressful than stand-up. And I'd been quite pissed off by like the comedians that I'd interacted with at open mics. Like, I had a really shitty experience where I had tried to make a joke which involved audience participation. The audience stayed silent during that section, so I had to like fill in the blank of my joke. And the joke was about the way people in Glasgow versus people in Edinburgh speak to each other. Glasgow's notoriously more friendly than Edinburgh is, and that's what I was trying to make a joke about. But the joke involved a true story about me seeing someone shout and swear at a homeless person. And I wanted to basically cast a light on some racist assumptions that might exist if I was to ask the audience where the homeless person was from. No matter where they said they were from, I was going to shout, "That's racist," because you're assuming that someone might be homeless because of their the country of origin. No one said anything, so I said the country that I thought the person was from, and then I got labelled as a racist by the rest of the comedians that night. The host didn't want to shake my hand after the set. The next comic up made a joke about me as if I was like a bigoted person. And then I went to an open mic the next night in the same city, and I was immediately told that I couldn't do any of the jokes that I'd done the night before, because they don't do that kind of thing here. And so I was basically, as a new comic, I made a mistake in a joke because I wrote into the joke that the audience would say something, which they didn't, and then I had to fall back on my own like fill in the blank word for that joke, which then the joke ended up blowing up in my face because I then was called a racist, and the whole joke was supposed to be about racist assumptions. And so big learning for me, but also like I was really disappointed by how like unwilling to give any sort of benefit of the doubt to a new comic the rest of the also new comics in the room were. And so the irony for me is that after at that point I'd done maybe 5 or 6 open mic gigs, and the only problems I'd ever had with my material was with other comics. Like I hadn't had any issues with audience members. I'd been able to make audiences laugh with the content I came up with, but I was getting this really sort of bad vibe of other comedians in the Scotland scene. So at that point, obviously we had COVID kicked in for 2 years. The whole sort of open mic scene shut down for that time, and I was sort of not, I'd kind of like got a bit fed up at that point of trying to do stand-up comedy. Couldn't do improv comedy because of lockdown. And so it kind of, everything went on pause until 2022. In 2022, the Edinburgh Fringe started up again, and I'd auditioned for an improv team in March 2020, just before lockdown. And that's TBC Improv. And they got back in touch and said, are you still interested? That we'd like to have you join the team. And I was delighted because basically performing at the Fringe as someone growing up in Scotland was like a lifelong dream for me. So I couldn't believe I had the chance to do it. And so I said yes and did rehearsals that summer, and then had my first sort of professional comedy gig as an improv performer with TBC Improv in August 2022. And basically I've never looked back since. I performed at the Fringe for 3 years running now. Absolutely love it. Performed with the TBC guys as well as other guest spots that I've sort of met other improvisers and done their shows as well. And I kind of thought, well, maybe that's more my thing. Maybe improv is more the direction I'm going to go in. And then I realized that after taking a trip out to LA this year to do more improv training with the Groundlings, I thought, the curiosity in me, having not done stand-up since 2020, I was like, well, there's going to be a big open mic scene out in LA. Maybe I should start to check some of the gigs out and maybe try a bit of stand-up again and see how it goes. And that first week I was out there, I did a stand-up open mic slot on the Thursday, and I just like absolutely caught the bug again for it. Like I did a 5-minute set, went really well, had people laughing, and I was like, oh, I'm going to need to do some more of this. And basically got on stage every day for the next 6 weeks, whether it was improv, stand-up, or did some clowning as well. And just like had an absolute whale of a time and built up a bank of material that I can now come back and I'm going to be trying at Scotland-based open mics now for the next few weeks and try and make that a regular habit. So adding the stand-up comedy side of things back into my repertoire, and I'm feeling really confident. But like I think what improv has told me or shown me is that you can try and be funny, and it might not work each line, and that's totally fine, because all that means is just forget about that one and you move on to the next joke. Like the first few times I tried to do stand-up comedy, I basically put so much weight on myself and like my entire existence, whether or not I was actually a funny person, was based around whether I wrote something down and people laughed at it. And that's absolutely nuts in terms of like the amount of pressure to put on myself. And no wonder I wasn't enjoying trying to do stand-up when that was what I was associating with it. And the benefit of being in LA is that you were able to get on stage and try and do stand up like 2 or 3 times a day if you wanted to. And so I've gone from like having only tried to do stand up comedy 5 times. Lockdown happened. I've come out of lockdown. And in August, you can get sort of like 15 to 20 comedy gigs in a month. And I got that and then some in LA on the other side of the world on my own, trying to pursue all these opportunities to perform comedy. And like I feel like I've had maybe like a year's worth of comedy education in that 6 week period, because I just got to go and do it so often compared to whether if I was trying to do comedy with that regularity in Scotland. It's just like doesn't exist on the same level. So I think for me, like the big goals for me right now are continue to perform at stand-up open mics regularly, continue to work on my improv skills. I'm going to be back out to the training with the Gurnlands over the next couple of years, and so I want to make sure I'm firing on all cylinders when I get there. And the stand-up writing will really help me keep working that muscle for doing other comedy writing like sketch writing. And so that's the thing for me right now. I'm not saying, oh yeah, I'm gonna start getting paid comedy gigs. I don't think it's realistic to think that, because the Scotland scene is really closely managed by basically you've got a small number of professional comedians in Scotland that basically dictate who gets on the scene, who's seen as good, who's seen as not good. And so realistically, are they going to give me a chance of any kind of paid work for a few years? Probably not. And so I'm just going to keep working on my writing, working on my performance. And then, one target for me is to try and put on a solo show at the Fringe 2026. So that's my plan. And make sure that don't let people put me off again this time. Because I think that was silly of me, basically, to let them distract me like that from a overall goal, which is always to try and become a really good stand-up comic.